I found out my best friend was secretly dating my ex, and my family knew the whole time. They say blood is thicker than water, but what happens when your blood and your best friend both drown you in the same lie? My name is Madison, and I'm 28 years old. For 10 years, my world had a fixed point, a North Star that wasn't in the sky, but sat across from me at countless coffee shops, held my hair back during rough nights, and knew the words to every song I screamed in the car. Her name is Isabella, and she wasn't just my best friend, she was the sister I got to choose. Our bond was the kind people write novels about, an unbreakable force forged in the fires of high school drama, college heartbreaks, and the terrifying leap into adulthood. We shared everything, from clothes and secrets to dreams and fears. There was no space between us, no territory left uncharted. Or so I thought. The story really begins, not with a bang, but with a quiet, unsettling hum of normalcy. It was a Tuesday, and I was leaving my job as a graphic designer at a small, trendy firm downtown. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of roasted nuts from a street vendor and the promise of winter. I was on my way to Isabella's place, a bottle of her favorite, overpriced wine tucked into my bag. We hadn't had a proper girls' night in weeks, our schedules clashing like cymbals in a bad orchestra. I'd managed to clear my evening, planning a surprise. I pictured her face, the way her eyes would light up, the little squeal of delight she'd let out. I was smiling to myself as I drove, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and red. My mind drifted, as it often did, to Liam. Liam was my ex, the great love of my life, the man I'd thought I would marry until he wasn't. Our breakup had been a messy, gut-wrenching affair 6 months prior, a slow erosion of trust that ended in a catastrophic landslide. Isabella had been my rock through it all. She'd held me while I sobbed, brought me ice cream, and fueled my anger with a righteous fury that matched my own. She'd called him every name in the book, built a fortress around my heart, and stood guard at the gates. She was the reason I was starting to feel like myself again, the reason I could even think about dating or trusting someone new in the future. She was my hero. As I turned onto Isabella's street, a quaint tree-lined avenue in a quiet neighborhood, I noticed her car wasn't in its usual spot. That was odd. She was supposed to be home. I pulled my own car into a visitor's space a few doors down, frowning slightly. Maybe she'd run to a store. I pulled out my phone to text her, a casual, "Where you at?" with a laughing emoji. As my thumb hovered over the send button, I saw another car pull up to the curb just ahead. It was a sleek black sedan, one I recognized instantly. It was Liam's car. My heart did a strange little flip, a painful lurch that felt like a physical blow. What was he doing here? On her street? 1,000 possibilities, all of them horrible, flashed through my mind. Were they meeting? Was he trying to get back together with me through her? Was he causing trouble? I felt a surge of protective anger, my fingers tightening around my phone. I sunk down in my seat, my breath catching in my throat. I watched as the driver's side door opened and a figure stepped out. It was him, taller and broader than I remembered, his dark hair a mess from the drive. He looked around, a nervous gesture, before walking up the path to a house. But it wasn't Isabella's house. It was the house 2 doors down. A wave of relief. So potent it made me dizzy, washed over me. Of course, he was visiting someone else. A friend, a new girlfriend, anyone. It was just a coincidence, a cruel twist of fate that had brought him to the same street at the same time as me. I let out a shaky laugh, the sound foreign and brittle in the quiet car. I was being paranoid. Isabella would never. My family would never. The world felt right again, just for a second. Then, the front door of the house 2 doors down opened, and a figure stepped out to greet him. It wasn't a stranger. It was Isabella, smiling up at him in a way I had never seen her smile at anyone before, a way that made my blood run cold. The world didn't just stop, it shattered. Every piece of my reality, every memory I held dear, fractured into a million razor-sharp shards. The smile on Isabella's face was a key, turning in a lock I didn't know existed, opening a door to a dimension of pain I had never visited. It wasn't a friendly smile. It wasn't a polite, "Oh, hello, what are you doing here?" smile. It was an intimate, radiant, utterly familiar smile. It was the smile of someone who was seen, known, and cherished. It was the smile she used to give me when I'd tell a stupid joke, the smile I thought was reserved for our shared world. But it wasn't for me. It was for him, for Liam, my Liam, the man who had broken my heart into so many pieces that I was still finding them in the corners of my life months later. The man she had helped me curse, the man she had labeled a monster, a villain in the tragic story of my life. And there they were, standing under the warm glow of a porch light, looking like the cover of a romance novel. He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek, a gesture so tender, so personal, it felt like a physical violation. I watched, frozen in the driver's seat of my car, a silent spectator to my own private horror show. My mind, in a desperate attempt to protect itself, started trying to rationalize. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe he was there to apologize to her on my behalf. Maybe he was returning something of mine she'd borrowed. Maybe I was having a complete psychotic break. But then she leaned into his touch, her eyes closing for a moment as if savoring the contact. And he bent his head, his lips brushing against her forehead. It was a gesture of pure, unadulterated affection. It was the kind of gesture that said, "I'm here for you. I'm yours." And in that moment, all the flimsy excuses my mind had constructed crumbled into dust. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a secret that had been kept from me by the one person I trusted more than anyone. The bottle of wine in my passenger seat felt like a lead weight, a symbol of a celebration that would never happen. The girls' night I had so carefully planned was a fantasy, a joke. The real party was happening 2 doors down, and I wasn't on the guest list. I was the punchline. A wave of nausea rose in my throat, hot and acidic. I fumbled with the door handle, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the metal. I needed to get out of there. I needed to breathe. I stumbled out of the car, the cool night air doing little to soothe the burning in my chest. I leaned against the side of my car, my head spinning. How long? The question screamed through my mind, a relentless, torturous echo. How long had this been going on? Since before we broke up? After? Was our entire friendship a lie? Was her comfort during my breakup just a performance? I thought back to all the times she'd listened to me cry, her arm wrapped around my shoulders. Was she thinking about him the whole time? Was she counting down the minutes until she could call him? The betrayal was a physical entity, a beast with claws and teeth, ripping me apart from the inside out. But then another thought, even more terrifying, began to surface. My family, my mom, my dad, my sister Grace. I had told them everything. I had cried on my mother's shoulder, ranted to my father, and analyzed every text message with my sister. Isabella was a part of our family. She came to every holiday, every birthday, every Sunday dinner. Was it possible that they knew? The thought was so absurd, so horrifying, that I almost dismissed it. My mom, who still called me her baby girl. My dad, who had threatened to have a word with Liam after the breakup. Grace, my older sister, my protector. They wouldn't. They couldn't. But as I stood there, in the shadows of a street that suddenly felt foreign and hostile, a seed of doubt was planted. A tiny, poisonous seed that began to sprout tendrils of suspicion, wrapping themselves around my heart. I had to know. I couldn't go home, not to my empty apartment, not to the silence that would only amplify my thoughts. I had to go to them. I had to go to the one place I had always considered safe, the one place I had always been unconditionally loved. I had to go home to my family. The drive to my parents' house was a blur of streetlights and silent tears. I didn't turn on the radio. The sound of my own ragged breathing was the only soundtrack I needed. Every few miles, I'd glance at the passenger seat, at the bottle of wine that now seemed like a monument to my own stupidity. I'd planned a surprise. The irony was so bitter it tasted like ash in my mouth. My mind was a frantic carousel of images and questions, spinning faster and faster until I felt dizzy. Isabella's smile, Liam's hand on her cheek, the way they looked at each other, like they were the only two people in the world. It was a look I once thought was reserved for me. The betrayal was a gaping wound, and every memory of our friendship was like salt being rubbed into it. I remembered the trip we took to the beach last summer, just a few weeks after the breakup. Isabella had insisted, saying I needed to get away. We'd walked on the sand at sunset, and she'd told me that I deserved someone who would cherish me, someone who would never hurt me. Had she been talking about Liam even then? Had she been planning her next move while pretending to nurse my wounds? The thought made me sick. I pulled into my parents' driveway, the familiar two-story colonial a welcome sight in the darkness. The porch light was on, a warm yellow beacon that had always signaled safety and comfort. Tonight, it just felt like a spotlight, illuminating my own naivety. I sat in the car for a long moment, trying to compose myself. I didn't want to walk in there a blubbering mess. I wanted to be strong, to be clear-headed. But as I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror, I saw a stranger. My eyes were red and swollen, my face pale and blotchy. I looked broken. I took a deep breath, the air catching in my throat, and got out of the car. I walked to the front door, my keys jangling in my trembling hand. I didn't need them. The door was unlocked, as it always was. I stepped inside, the scent of my mother's lavender potpourri and my father's old pipe tobacco filling my senses. It was the smell of home, of security, of a lifetime of love. And for a moment, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I was here. I was safe. Everything would be okay. My mother was in the living room, curled up on the sofa with a book. She looked up as I walked in, her face immediately etched with concern. She set her book aside, her eyes scanning my face, taking in my disheveled appearance and the tear tracks on my cheeks. She didn't say anything, just opened her arms. I collapsed into them, the dam of my composure finally breaking. The sobs that tore from my chest were raw and animalistic, the sounds of a soul being torn apart. My mother held me, her hands stroking my hair, murmuring words of comfort that I couldn't quite hear through the haze of my own grief. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just let me cry. And in that moment, I was so grateful for her, for the unconditional love that was a constant in my life. After a few minutes, my sobs subsided into quiet hiccups. My mother handed me a tissue, her expression soft and full of sympathy. I took a shaky breath, preparing to tell her everything. I needed to say the words out loud, to make them real. I needed her to be angry with me, to be on my side, to help me make sense of the senseless. I looked at her, my eyes pleading, and opened my mouth to speak. But before I could get a single word out, she spoke first. Her voice was gentle, but it held a note of something else, something I couldn't quite place. Was it pity? Resignation? She said my name, her voice full of a sadness that went deeper than my own. And then she said the words that would destroy my world all over again. She said she was so sorry that I had to find out this way. The world tilted on its axis, the familiar living room spinning into a kaleidoscope of colors and shapes. My mother's words hung in the air, a death sentence to my reality. Sorry that I had to find out this way. Not sorry for what happened, not sorry for the betrayal, sorry for the method of discovery. It was a subtle distinction, but it was the difference between a bullet and a bomb. The bullet was Isabella and Liam. The bomb was my mother's quiet, resigned confession. I pulled away from her, my body recoiling as if I'd been struck. I stared at her, my mind struggling to process the meaning behind her words. Her eyes, usually so full of warmth and light, were clouded with a guilty knowledge that made my stomach churn. She knew all along. The question that had been a terrifying possibility in my mind was now a horrifying certainty. My father walked into the room then, a mug of tea in his hand. He took one look at my face, then at my mother's, and his own expression faltered. He knew too. The realization hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of my lungs. This wasn't just Isabella's secret. It was a family secret. I was the only one who didn't know. I was the joke they were all in on. My sister Grace appeared in the doorway behind him, her face a mask of uncomfortable pity. The three of them, my entire immediate family, stood there, a united front of deception. They were a wall,
and I was on the outside, looking in. I felt a wave of dizziness, the room closing in on me. I couldn't breathe. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a cry of anguish. They watched me, their faces a mixture of sympathy and shame, but none of them spoke. What could they say? The damage was done. The silence was a confession in itself. My mind raced, connecting dots I hadn't even known existed. I thought about all the times my mother had asked about Isabella, her questions a little too casual, a little too probing. I thought about the time my dad had seen me crying and told me that sometimes people just grow apart. A strange piece of advice at the time, but now it felt like a coded message. I thought about Grace, who had been unusually quiet about the whole situation, offering platitudes instead of her usual fiery defense of me. They hadn't just known, they had been actively covering it up. They had chosen him, they had chosen her, they had chosen a lie over their own daughter, their own sister. The betrayal from Isabella was a clean, sharp cut. But this was a slow, agonizing poison seeping into every corner of my life, contaminating every happy memory I had of my family. Every holiday dinner, every Sunday brunch, every shared laugh was now tainted with the knowledge of their deception. I had come here for comfort, for a safe harbor in the storm of my own making, but I had sailed directly into the eye of the hurricane. I looked at them, at the people who were supposed to be my anchors, my rock, my everything, and I saw them for what they were, strangers. I didn't know them at all. The person I thought I was, the person they had raised me to be, was a fiction, a naive, trusting fool who believed in the goodness of people, in the sanctity of family, in the power of friendship. I had been living in a dream world, and they had been the ones pulling the strings. A cold, hard anger began to replace the shock and grief. It was a pure, white-hot rage that burned away the tears and the pain. I was done crying. I was done being the victim. I was done being the last to know. I straightened up, my spine stiffening with a resolve I didn't know I possessed. I looked each of them in the eye, my gaze unwavering. I didn't need to say anything. They could see it in my eyes. They could see the trust that had been shattered, the love that had turned to ash. They could see the daughter and sister they had lost. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room. I didn't look back. I didn't slam the door. I just walked away, leaving behind the shattered remains of my family and the life I thought I had. The first few days after I left my parents' house were a blur of sterile hotel rooms and greasy takeout containers. I had nowhere else to go. My apartment felt tainted, a shrine to a life that no longer existed. I couldn't go back there, not yet. So I checked into a nondescript hotel on the other side of town, a place where no one knew my name and no one asked any questions. I turned off my phone, the constant buzzing of notifications from Isabella, my mother, and my sister, a relentless reminder of the betrayal. I didn't want to hear their excuses. I didn't want to read their apologies. I just wanted to be alone. The silence was deafening. In the quiet of the hotel room, with only the hum of the mini-fridge for company, my mind became a torture chamber. I replayed every conversation, every interaction, looking for the clues I had missed. I thought about the last time I had seen Isabella, just a few days before the discovery. We had gotten lunch, and she had been uncharacteristically quiet, her phone face down on the table the entire time. I had asked her if everything was okay, and she had forced a smile, saying she was just tired. Now I knew she had been waiting for a text from him. I thought about the last family dinner I had attended, a week before. My sister had spent the whole night on her phone, a secretive smile on her face. I had teased her about it, asking if she had a new boyfriend. She had just shrugged, her cheeks flushing. She wasn't texting a new boyfriend. She was probably texting Isabella, discussing me, discussing my ex. The lies were everywhere, woven into the fabric of my life like a poisonous thread. I felt like I was going crazy. I started to doubt everything, my own perception, my own judgment. How could I have been so blind, so stupid? The anger I had felt at my parents' house had faded, replaced by a deep, profound sadness. I was grieving the loss of not just one relationship, but of my entire support system. The people I had counted on, the people I had trusted with my life, had all betrayed me. I was an island, adrift in a sea of deceit. One night, unable to sleep, I opened my laptop and started scrolling through my old photos. It was a form of self-torture, I knew, but I couldn't stop myself. I looked at pictures of Isabella and me, our arms wrapped around each other, our faces glowing with happiness. I saw the lies in our smiles. I looked at pictures of my family, all of us crowded together on the sofa, laughing at some inside joke. I saw the secrets in their eyes. And then I saw it. A photo from our family vacation last year, a few months before the breakup. We were at the beach, all of us squinting into the sun. Isabella was there, of course. She was part of the family. And so was Liam. He had come with me, a guest in our family circle. In the photo, we were all smiling, a picture-perfect moment. But as I stared at the image, I saw something I had never noticed before. Isabella wasn't looking at the camera. She was looking at Liam, a soft, secret smile on her lips. And my mother, standing next to her, wasn't looking at the camera either. She was looking at Isabella, a knowing, almost sad expression on her face. It was all there, in a single photograph, the beginning of the end, the seed of the betrayal. It wasn't just a recent development. It had been brewing for a long time, right under my nose. The discovery was like a punch to the gut, but it was also a moment of clarity. I couldn't change the past. I couldn't undo the hurt, but I could control my future. I could choose to stop being a victim. I could choose to walk away from the toxicity and the lies. I could choose myself. It was the hardest choice I would ever have to make, but it was the only one I had left. I had to cut them all out of my life. Not just Isabella, but my family too. I had to start over, completely and utterly alone. It was a terrifying prospect, but it was also a liberating one. For the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. It was a small, fragile flame, but it was enough to light the way. The decision to cut everyone off was not made in a fit of rage, but in a moment of quiet, devastating clarity. It was a surgical strike on my own life, a necessary amputation to save the patient. The patient was me. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I was severing ties with the people who had been my entire world for 28 years. I was erasing a decade of friendship and a lifetime of family. But I also knew that I couldn't heal in the same environment that had made me sick. I couldn't rebuild my trust on a foundation of lies. I had to find a new foundation, a new ground zero. I spent the next few days making a plan. I wasn't just going to disappear. I was going to leave on my own terms, with a final word. I needed to explain my decision, not for their sake, but for my own. I needed to close this chapter of my life once and for all. I opened my laptop, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The words didn't come easily. How do you summarize a lifetime of love and betrayal in a single email? How do you articulate the depth of your pain without sounding like a victim? How do you say goodbye to the people you once loved more than anything? I started with my family. I wrote about the happy memories, the vacations, the holidays, the ordinary moments that had once meant so much. I thanked them for the good times, for the love they had given me, for the person they had helped me become. And then I wrote about the betrayal. I didn't write with anger, but with a sad, matter-of-fact tone. I described the moment I saw Isabella and Liam together, the shock, the confusion. I wrote about my mother's quiet confession, the look on my father's and sister's faces. I explained that their deception had broken something inside me, something that could never be repaired. I told them that I needed to walk away, not just Isabella, but from them too. I needed space to heal, to rediscover who I was without their influence, without their lies. It was the hardest thing I had ever written. When I was finished, I read it over, my tears staining the keyboard. It was a goodbye letter to my family, to my past, to the person I used to be. Next, I wrote a separate email to Isabella. This one was shorter, more direct. I didn't dwell on the past. I didn't rehash the details of her betrayal. I simply told her that our friendship was over, that I could never trust her again. I wished her well, a hollow, meaningless gesture that was more for my own sake than hers. I needed to be the bigger person, to rise above the pettiness and the pain. With the emails written, I felt a sense of relief, a weight lifting from my shoulders. But I wasn't done. I couldn't stay in this city, a constant reminder of my past. I needed a fresh start, a new beginning in a place where no one knew my story. I opened a new tab on my laptop and started searching for one-way tickets. I didn't have a specific destination in mind. I just needed to go somewhere far away. Somewhere I could be anonymous. Somewhere I could rebuild my life from scratch. I scrolled through the list of cities, my finger hovering over the mouse. Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, they were all too big, too overwhelming. I kept scrolling, my eyes landing on a small city in the Pacific Northwest. It was known for its rain, its coffee, and its quirky, independent spirit. It was the opposite of the sunny, superficial city I currently called home. It felt right. It felt like a place where I could be quiet, where I could heal. I clicked on the ticket, my heart pounding in my chest. It was a leap of faith, a terrifying and exhilarating step into the unknown. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if I would ever be happy again. But I knew one thing for sure. I was finally free. I was finally in control of my own destiny, and that was a start. The day I left was gray and overcast, a perfect reflection of my mood. I packed a single suitcase, leaving behind almost everything I owned. The clothes, the books, the knickknacks, they were all artifacts from a life that was no longer mine. I didn't want any reminders of the past. I wanted to travel light. I took a taxi to the airport, the city I had always called home, passing by in a blur of familiar landmarks and forgotten memories. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel nostalgic. I just felt numb. I was a ghost, haunting my own life until the very last minute. At the airport, I sent the emails. I didn't hesitate. I didn't second-guess myself. I just hit send, a final, decisive act. It was done. There was no going back. As I walked through the security checkpoint, I felt a sense of liberation, a lightness I hadn't felt in months. I was leaving behind the pain, the betrayal, the lies. I was leaving behind Madison, the naive, trusting girl who had been so blind. And I was becoming someone new, someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who knew the true meaning of resilience. The flight was long and uneventful. I spent most of it staring out the window, watching the world shrink below me. The cities and towns, the mountains and rivers, they all looked so small, so insignificant. It was a reminder of my own place in the universe, a reminder that my problems, my pain, were just a tiny blip on the radar of existence. It was a comforting thought. When the plane landed, I stepped out into the cool, damp air of my new city. It was raining, a soft, persistent drizzle that felt like a baptism. I took a deep breath, the air clean and fresh. I was here. I was really here. I had no plan, no job, no place to live. I had nothing but a suitcase and a fierce determination to survive. But I also had something else. I had hope. I found a small, furnished apartment in a quiet neighborhood, a short walk from the coast. I got a job as a barista at a local coffee shop, a simple, mindless job that allowed me to blend in, to be just another face in the crowd. I spent my days off exploring my new city, walking on the beach, hiking in the mountains, getting lost in the winding streets of the old town. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. I was learning to be my own best friend, my own confidant, my own rock. I was learning to be happy on my own terms. I never heard back from my family or Isabella. I didn't expect to. I had closed the door, and they had respected my decision. Or maybe they were just relieved to be rid of me, the constant reminder of their own deception. It didn't matter. Their silence was a gift, a chance for me to heal without interruption. Sometimes, on a quiet night, I would think about them. I would wonder if they ever thought about me, if they ever regretted what they had done. But I didn't dwell on it. I couldn't. I had to keep moving forward. The pain was still there, a dull ache in my heart that would probably never completely go away. But it was no longer a gaping wound. It was a scar, a reminder of the battle I had fought and won. I had lost my family, my best friend, my entire world, but I had found myself. And in the end, that was all that mattered. I was no longer the girl who had been betrayed. I was the woman who had survived. I was the woman who had chosen herself. And as I stood on the beach, watching the waves crash against the shore, I knew that I was finally home.